A couple of more things on the Isle of Lewis is the Shee and the origin of the of the fairy, the name, and that was really interesting with Pharaoh and all of that.
The Shee was very interesting, and it was kind of frustrating because they tend to, when the English invaded Scotland and Ireland, they tended to take all the words and not write them phonetically. So we pronounce them as the Sith, but it's not. It's pronounced the Shee, I wish they would sort of write Gaelic phonetically because then you could pronounce it properly and not make a fool of yourself. I think they did it deliberately. It's kind of sad because Gaelic's a lovely sounding language. And I like the idea of language. But the Shee, I began to trace the story of the Shee back to a time when the church was historically about the 8th century arriving in Ireland, and they were basically killing off all the paganism. Now, a pagan is someone who lives in the countryside. That's all it is. But the story really has to go back into Europe at a time when the church was trying to back a group of people called the Carolingians. And at the time, through the most of Central Europe, and specifically around France, the governing people, the rulers, were basically the Merovingian bloodline. They could trace their lineage all the way back to Sumeria, which then makes the connection and the jump to the lords of Anu. They were practicing the same tradition. Now, the church couldn't have that because they wanted the power for themselves. So it was a big power grab. So imagine their surprise after installing the Carolingians on the throne in Europe to end up in Ireland, and people are worshipping these gods called the TUATHA de DANANN.
Uh-huh.
And they thought, oh, God, I thought we got rid of all of these people. And they knew who these people were. They were part of the original bloodline. Well, they couldn't have that because it would undermine the church's claim to hallowed appointment. So they had to mythologize the TUATHA de DANANN by making them into miniature people, the fairy people. Okay, and there's one particular chapel in Ireland where the monks were instructed to rewrite the entire history into mythology. So what was real now become mythologized, and people who are exalted now become invisible beings. They become the inhabitants of the mounds, and that's where the Shee come in. This sort of fairy energy that lives in the mounds, and this is what the TUATHA de DANANN really were. So if you and because the mounds are dark, that's where evil resides. So if you happen to have dreams about fairies, that means you're being attacked by the devil, and you have to come to the church, and we'll make sure you're not bothered by fairies ever again.
Right.
By the way, fairies are bloodsuckers, and they were originally the fairies were actually described as bloodsucking. So if you were, for example, if you had consumption, for example, you'd be burned alive because you were suffering from the bites of the fairies. I mean, talk about a bad life.
Yeah,
suffering. Oh, I'm going to be burned alive. Thank you. That's my cue. But in doing this, in mythologizing the TUATHA de DANANN gods and making them into invisible people, they kind of opened the door to actually describing who they were. Because in real life, the reason why they were fairy folk was because of the color of their skin. They were fair folk. Fairy comes from fair, and they were fair. They were very elegant, they were very tall, very linear features, just like Scandinavian people tend to be.
Yeah.
With their blonde hair, which makes them very light, and the skin is much lighter than anybody else. That is where the fair came in. They were very elegant, and also their culture was very elegant because they knew more than rudimentary people.
Yeah.
They knew about navigation, the stars, healing. And they did possess a connection to manipulate the laws of nature. So when they start talking about the Shee and the fairy energy in the mounds, actually they're not that far off from what the TUATHA de DANANN were doing.
Yeah.
Because they could actually manipulate the laws of nature, and the laws of nature are themselves harnessed in all of these mounds, like Newgrange, for example. You go into Newgrange or Nath, and there's something in there. There's something very unusual in that building. And if you do the right work in the right way, you will have an out-of-body experience. And you'll come back and you go, no one was buried here. This is to do with my development.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like the thief being caught red-handed with a bag of loot in the cupboard. The church did this to mythologize real people to give themselves legitimacy and yet open the door to describing what these people actually did in real life. It's a strange story. So the more you actually look into the metaphor, the more you realize that they're actually trying to hide real people with a real history.
And is there a connection there between the kind of elementals, the nature elementals and fairies as well, though? How does that sort of connect?
Well, now
Or
you
is
get
it?
the overlap of myth and reality, and this is what the
Yes.
Egyptians were particularly good at, which is what drives people crazy. We fight about the origin of the gods that were just myth. No, myth is a mechanical device to help you understand a very complex problem. And the gods were not just invisible; they were real people too, because the concept that a god is a force of nature. It's not a guy with a white beard sitting on a throne. This glass has a god. That blade of grass has a god. This light bulb has a god. It's the spirit form of anything that lives and breathes. So once you understand that concept, you become as a god because you can work with that energy and you can manipulate it.
Yeah.
And that's where the connection comes in, that these people had the ability to manipulate the laws of nature. And that's what made them so powerful and also so detrimental to the church, because they didn't have any power. They wanted that power. They couldn't have it because they didn't have the underlying understanding. So that's kind of where the connection comes in. It's the fact that they possessed the laws of how to work with nature because they could understand it. They could hear it, feel it, see it.
Yeah.
And once you get to that point, you can change the weather. The Druids were well known to manipulate the weather because they had that power.
Yeah.
And if you speak to a Native American, they'll say, yeah, we can do that like that. And they can do it like that. In fact, there's a famous case in a drought in New Mexico years ago where a Navajo shaman went up to the top of a hill and said, I'm going to make rain. Walks around 7 times, does a little prayer, comes back down and says, well, it's going to get a drink. And within about an hour, there's a massive flash flood warning, which didn't stop for hours. It washed away bridges, cows, motorboats, everything went down into the gully.
Yeah.
And in fact, a friend of his said that was really impressive, the way you could use the power of intent to connect with the elements to make water come out of the sky. But have you ever figured out how much rain to ask for? Because that was a lot. And the guy says, no, we haven't figured that one out yet. So it's very humble.
No, amazing. Yeah.
And all of us do this. All people could do this at one point. I mean, anybody's capable of doing this.
Yeah.
And there's experiments that have been done in Princeton that show that a group of people, 20 people in a room, have been able to change the computerized beat of a computer. So that's the power of your focused intent to work and move a machine. Who would have thought that was possible? So now we're beginning to realize the power that these gods had is nothing more than working with nature, which is exactly the paradox that we're in right now. Nature's taking over, as we've already begun to discover. And it's going to get weird in the next 10 years as well. But we have the ability to work with that and overcome it.
Yeah.
I think it's a lesson.
Absolutely.